Marinaro the Sick Podcast. And you can listen to us on all social media platforms and follow us on Facebook at the Sick Podcast and on Facebook. Like it and share it with your friends. We're talking hoops with my basketball aficionado, John D'Angelis. And I never thought I'd bring in someone who loves the game as much or more than he does. But John, I think I found somebody. He's Canada's version of Coach K. He is our very own Steve Konchalski. Coach, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tony. Happy to be here.
Well, thank you very much for doing it, Coach. Your CV speaks for itself. It's very impressive. Thank you very much. You've won 919 games in 46 years at St. Francis Xavier University. I have to ask you, in a business that has so much turnover, how the heck have you been able to last that long?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think you're going to see, as the game evolves and society has, more and more pressures on coaches. I don't know if you're going to see that happen very often. But I grew up in New York City. I fell in love with the game as a young teenager. Came up to Canada to Acadia University in Nova Scotia. We had a lot of success there. We won a national championship, and I just decided I'm going to stay in Canada. I love the country, and I love the small towns in east, and that's what St. FX is in. Antigonish, a small town, 5,000 people. Hey, they've just made a very comfortable situation for me coaching at a small school where I can get to know the players and really kind of build relationships in addition to building teams.
Coach, how did you end up in Acadia from New York?
Stu Aberdeen, who was a legendary coach, originally from New York State, came down to New York City. He was good friends with my high school coach, Jack Curran, and he talked me into coming up to Canada. I had to look at the map to see where Nova Scotia was, but I kind of really made the adjustment from New York to the smaller towns pretty seamlessly, like I said, it's changed my whole life coming from New York to, and from there, besides the 46 years at St. FX, I've worked with the national team program for over 30 years. So it's been a great situation, and I've been able to combine the national team in the summers with St. FX in the school, my main obviously occupation in the wintertime, and it's been a great ride.
Coach, anyone who grows up playing amateur sports and they want to play in a national championship, right? And once they play in a national championship, they want to win a national championship. And anyone who ends up going into the coaching world wants to coach in a national championship. And once they coach in it, they want to win that national championship. 3 people in Canada have won a national championship as a player and as a coach. You're one of them. When you hear me say that, and I know you knew that already, but how cool is that?
Well, it is really rewarding. And it's interesting you say that, because winning it as a player was a tremendous experience way back in 1965. Wasn't yesterday, but that was a great experience. And it's funny, when we won our first one as a team at St. FX in 1993, I was asked by the media which is more rewarding, winning as a player or a coach. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of time to reflect on it. But having time to reflect, I would say, winning as a coach, actually, it was more rewarding because you can share it with all those young, men that you recruited and helped develop. And as a player, you're more, I guess, self-centered, if you want to call it that, and you don't see it from the broad perspective. But anyway, they were all great experiences, and I'm very fortunate to have a chance to experience that.
Yeah. John, before passing it to you, I just have a follow-up question for Coach Konchalski, and that is, winning as a player, is there something that you took out of it that helped you when you were a coach?
Well, I think the biggest thing I learned as a player that helped me as a coach is the fact that I was not a great natural athlete. I couldn't dunk. I wasn't particularly quick. I really worked on my skills. I was a shooter, and I really worked on that every single day. And I think that work ethic, I'd like to think I could, bring that to my players. But also, I having played at one of the top high schools in New York City, Archbishop Malloy, I spent a lot of time collecting splinters. To be honest with you, I had to really work to get off the bench and get into games, and then eventually, have to be successful in playing in college. But I think that having sat on the bench, having had to work so hard to even make the team in high school, prepared me to be able to coach and understand what players are going through, not just your starting five, but the players that are that are struggling, your ninth man, your 10th man, that are so critical to team culture. So I think that's the biggest thing I learned, take away from my career as a player.
Coach, you're extremely humble, because if I'm correct, I think you were the MVP of the Nationals at Acadia.
Well, eventually,
you really went from collecting splinters to being an MVP of the national championships.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It took a lot of work. That wasn't happening overnight, right? And that's the work ethic that you need to be successful at whatever you do.
You're a success story. You're a success story. Coach, 3 Olympics. Tell me which one is the one you remember the most.
Well, I would say probably I would have to say Montreal in '76, simply because I was, I had been living in Montreal and working at Loyola College in Montreal West, prior to that, from '71 to '75. So I never forget that feeling marching into Olympic Stadium. As the last group that came in, there were 75,000 people in Olympic Stadium, and I really, the first time I understood what the roar of the crowd, that expression, the roar of the crowd, when the Canadian team came in and the Olympic Stadium exploded, that was a tremendous source of pride for me too. It was an amazing experience.
We too in Montreal remember those Olympics, Coach. We're still paying for it. 45 years later.
Absolutely.
Did you play against the American team?
We played the Americans in the in the semifinal game. Yeah, and we had played them in Plattsburgh, about a week before the Olympics, and gave them a really good game. But our starting center, a big 6'10" kid by the name of Ken McKenzie, who was a fantastic rebounder, went down with a knee injury in that game, unfortunately. So we didn't have him when we played in the semifinal against the U.S. Dean Smith was coaching that team, we lost to them. They beat us pretty good, But just to be in the Olympic Games and compete for a medal we were fortunate enough. We played for a medal twice both in '76 and then in '84 in Los Angeles. We lost to Yugoslavia for the bronze medal. But the Olympics are an amazing experience. Just to be in a village with thousands of athletes that have dedicated their whole lives to being right there those 2 weeks was an amazing experience.
Nadia Comaneci.
Yeah, it's the Sick Podcast brought to you by MyBookie. Use code SickPicks for a 50% deposit bonus. Bet, win, get paid. Coach, if you don't mind, the personal question. 76 Olympics in Montreal, and you're in that village with thousands of athletes. Were you single at the time?
I was. In fact, here's a funny story. My wife, Charlene, who has become a great basketball fan, and probably my number one assistant coach, we've been married for 40 years. She was living in Montreal at the time. I didn't know her. I didn't know her. I didn't meet her until I came back to Nova Scotia. And this is how much of a basketball fan she was. During the Olympics, she went to Europe to travel Europe. Didn't want to deal with all the
tourists.
So if you don't mind me asking, how old were you at the 76 Olympics?
I was 30 years old.
30 years old, single, in a village with thousands of athletes in Montreal. Now I know why Montreal was your favorite Olympics, Coach. Hey, Coach, breaking news today at the time that we're recording this on the Thursday afternoon. We found out earlier this morning that a positive COVID test with Duke means they can't play the ACC tourney, which means they're out of March Madness. What a way to go out and not participate. So from our Coach K, how do you think the other Coach K south of the border is feeling right now?
Well, you probably feel like a lot of coaches felt this year. It was just a situation where it's totally out of control. I mean, it's out of your control. The only thing you could control is to try to get your players to come to practice every day, or if we have games, or like they did, is to try to keep a focus through all this craziness. As it turns out, I mean, Duke was on the bubble anyway. Really, I mean, there was speculation that they had to, show really well in the ACC tournament. Exactly what that meant, I don't know, but to show really well in that tournament, even to get into the last four, to work their way into the tournament. And I think there's a whole bunch of things going in that we're not going to probably get into here, but the whole concept of recruiting one and done players, I think that's going by the wayside now because of the all these transfers that are coming around, that teams like Kentucky and North Carolina and Duke weren't the same this year, whether it was COVID, but I think a lot of it is you can't just win with 18-year-olds every single year. There's a lot to be said for building teams and having experienced players.
Coach, tell us for about 30 seconds how crazy the fans are in the Maritime about their basketball. People don't realize that in the rest of Canada.
Well, we don't have professional sport here. The only, so college sports is king, and that's that's one of the things. Having lived in Montreal and knowing, when I was there, the Expos were there. Obviously the Canadians, the Alouettes were big in those days, playing at the Autostad. You couldn't find a basketball score, way back in the small type, maybe. Whereas in the Maritimes, it's in the papers all the time, it's on the media all the time, and the fans come out and support it.
That's
Here
great.
at the Sick Podcast, go to sportbuffshop.com for all of your officially licensed sports apparel and more. Use code SICKHoodies15 for 15% off on all hoodies, once again, of all your favorite teams. Coach, when we talk Canadian basketball, we talk Steve Nash. You watch him do his job coaching that Brooklyn Nets team. How do you think he's transitioned from player to coach?
Well, I watched him grow in the 3 or 4 months of the season, actually. But knowing Steve and having had an opportunity to coach him for 2 or 3 summers with the national team back when he was a young player, when he was first in the NBA, he just has a level head. He has a way to communicate with people that others don't. He keeps his cool. He understands what it is to be a winner, because he had to completely dedicated his life to the game of basketball for him to get to where he got to, a 2-time MVP. And I've watched with a particular interest, obviously knowing Steve. He's definitely grown as a coach in the last, since the first couple of games of the season. Now, also, I think anybody might grow as a coach if you have Durant and Harden and Kyrie on your team.
I hear you. Well, you know what they say, Coach? Teams with good players usually go after good coaches who could coach them, right? So let me ask you this in ending, if I can. Did you have an inkling then? Did you think then, when he was a player and you were coaching him, that he could be a good coach one day?
Absolutely. And if I wasn't sure of it, I called him one time in his rookie year with Phoenix, and he was playing. He hadn't gotten any game in 14 games. He was playing behind a couple of guys by the name of Jason Kidd and Kevin Johnson, guards in the league. And I said, Steve, how are you dealing with not playing? He said, Coach, the practices are my games. If I have to come to practice every day, if I can compete with those guys in practice, I'll get to where I want to get to. And that's a mature young man who turned into a great basketball player, and I think he'll turn into a great coach as well.
That's a great story. In 10 seconds, if we can, Coach, give us a winner of March Madness.
I'm going to go with Gonzaga. I watched them the other night. They just have too many pieces to the puzzle, and they were down double digits to Brigham Young, and they end up winning by double digits. They've only won one game. They're undefeated and only won one game this year by less than double digits. So they're the favorites. Anything can happen in one game, but it's hard to bet against the Zags right now.
I think I could speak for John DeAngelis when I say what a pleasure in talking with a legendary coach.
Wow.
One of, the biggest basketball names in our country. You've marked our sport as a player and as a coach, the longevity, and you really have been a pioneer. What an honor this was for us, Coach Kanchelski. I really hope that we can do it again sometime soon.
Coach K, I cannot tell you how honored I am to have you on this show today. And thank you for giving us the time.
Right. Well, thank you both, Tony and John. Appreciate it anytime.
You be well, you be safe, and one day I want to hear more stories about 76.
All right, sounds good.
He is Steve Kanchelski. He's John DeAngelis. I'm Marinero. It's the Sick Podcast. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Sick Podcast.